The wall of brown water came roaring around the bend of the canyon, with such fury that Nora Thompson barely had time to scream before her horse reared and threw her into the mud. She hit the ground hard, the breath knocked from her lungs, and when she opened her eyes the flood was almost upon her, a churning mass of debris and destruction that would sweep her away like a twig. Then strong hands grabbed her arms, yanking her upward with such force she thought her shoulders might dislocate. And suddenly she was airborne, landing hard across the saddle of a galloping horse as it raced up the canyon wall. She clung to the leather, gasping, her fingers digging into the pommel as the rider behind her urged his mount higher, and below them the flash flood exploded through the narrow passage with a sound like thunder, consuming everything in its path. It was August of 1882, and Nora had been foolish enough to think the dry creek bed would stay dry. She had been traveling from Tucson to Agua Caliente, a small town nestled in the Arizona desert where her aunt supposedly ran a boarding house. The letter had arrived 3 months ago in Philadelphia, where Nora had been living in increasingly desperate circumstances after her father's death left her with nothing but debts, and the unwanted attention of his business partner, a man 40 years her senior who seemed to think those debts made her his property. The letter from Aunt Margaret had been a lifeline, an invitation to come west and help run the boarding house, and Nora had sold everything she owned to buy passage on the train and a horse for the final leg of the journey. Now that horse was gone, swept away by the flood, and she was draped across a stranger's saddle like a sack of grain, her heart hammering so hard she could hear it in her ears. The man behind her said nothing as he guided his horse higher, away from the deadly water, until finally they reached a flat outcropping of rock where he reined in and dismounted in one smooth motion. He reached up and helped her down, his hands steady on her waist, and Nora's legs nearly buckled when her feet touched solid ground. "You all right, miss?" His voice was deep and rough, tinged with concern, and when Nora finally looked up at her rescuer, she found herself staring into the most striking pair of gray eyes she had ever seen. He was tall, well over 6 feet, with broad shoulders and the lean, muscular build of a man who spent his life working under the sun. His face was tanned and weathered, with high cheekbones and a strong jaw shadowed with several days' worth of dark stubble. He wore a dusty black hat, a faded blue shirt and leather chaps over his denims, and there was a quiet competence about him that made Nora feel suddenly, inexplicably safe. "I think so," she managed, though her voice came out shakier than she would have liked. "You saved my life." "Lucky I was checking the high pastures," he said, his eyes scanning her face as if assessing her for injuries. "Saw the clouds building up north and figured there might be trouble in the washes. You hurt anywhere?" Nora took stock of herself. Her dress was torn and muddy, her arms were scraped, and she was fairly certain she would have spectacular bruises by morning, but nothing seemed broken. "Just my pride," she said, attempting a smile. "I should have known better than to ride through a dry wash when there were storms in the distance." "Storms can be 20 miles away and still send a flood through," he said, removing his hat and running a hand through his dark hair. "You are not from around here." "Philadelphia," Nora admitted. "I am heading to Agua Caliente. My aunt runs a boarding house there." His expression shifted slightly, something like recognition flickering across his features. "Margaret Thompson?" "Yes, do you know her?" "Everyone knows Miss Margaret," he said, and there was warmth in his voice now. "She is a good woman, runs a fine establishment." He paused, looking back down at the roaring flood below them. "Your horse?" "Gone," Nora said, and felt tears prick at her eyes despite her best efforts. "Everything I owned was in those saddlebags. My clothes, my money, my mother's jewelry." He was quiet for a moment, his jaw working as he considered this. "I am sorry," he said finally. "Flash floods do not leave much behind." Nora wrapped her arms around herself, suddenly feeling the weight of her situation. She was stranded in the desert with nothing but the muddy clothes on her back, miles from her destination, and completely dependent on the kindness of this stranger. The tears she had been holding back spilled over, and she turned away, mortified. "Hey now," he said softly, and she felt his hand, tentative and gentle, on her shoulder. "You are alive. That is what matters. The rest we can figure out." Nora turned back to him, wiping at her eyes with muddy hands, which only made things worse. He pulled a bandana from his pocket and handed it to her, his gray eyes steady and kind. "I am not going to leave you out here," he said, as if the idea was absurd. "My ranch is about 2 hours south. You can clean up, get some food, and I will take you to Agua Caliente in the morning." "I could not possibly impose," Nora began, but he shook his head. "It is not an imposition. It is what anyone would do." He extended his hand. "Ethan Miller. I run the Double M Ranch near Agua Caliente." Nora took his hand, feeling the calluses on his palm, the strength in his grip. "Nora Thompson, and I am very grateful, Mr. Miller." "Ethan," he corrected. "Out here we do not stand much on formality." He glanced at the sky, where the sun was beginning its descent toward the western horizon. "We should get moving. I do not want to be picking our way down these rocks in the dark." He helped her onto his horse, a sturdy buckskin gelding with patient eyes, and then swung up behind her. Nora had never been in such close proximity to a man before, had never felt the solid warmth of a male chest against her back, or the security of strong arms reaching around her to hold the reins. And the sensation was both unsettling and strangely comforting. She could smell him, a combination of leather and sage and something clean and masculine, and feel the steady rhythm of his breathing. They rode in silence at first, picking their way carefully down from the rocks, and then heading south across the desert floor. The landscape was harsh and beautiful in equal measure, all red rock and scrub brush and towering saguaro cacti standing like sentinels against the enormous sky. Nora had never seen anything like it. In Philadelphia, the buildings had pressed in close, blocking out the sun and sky, but here the world felt infinite, as if she could see forever in every direction. "You get used to it," Ethan said, as if reading her thoughts. "The openness. Some people say it makes them feel small. I always thought it made me feel free." "How long have you been out here?" Nora asked. "All my life. I was born in Texas, but my father brought us to Arizona when I was 10. He wanted to raise cattle, said this was the place to do it." He paused. He was right, mostly. "It is hard land, but it is honest land. It gives you what you earn, nothing more and nothing less." "Is your father still ranching?" "No. He died 5 years ago, cholera outbreak. My mother went a year later. I think she just missed him too much to want to stay." There was grief in his voice, old and worn smooth like river stone, but still there. "It is just me now, me and my hired hands. We run about 300 head of cattle, some horses. It is a good life. You not get lonely?" The question was out before Nora could stop it, too personal and too revealing, but Ethan did not seem offended. "Sometimes," he admitted. "Especially in the evenings. I will sit on the porch and think about how my mother used to sing while she cooked dinner, or how my father would tell stories about the old days. The quiet can be heavy when you are not used to it." He was silent for a moment. "What about you? You have family back in Philadelphia?" "Not anymore." Nora found herself telling him things she had not planned to share, about her father's sudden death, the debts, the awful moment when Mr. Cornelius Ashworth had informed her that he would be willing to forget those debts if she agreed to become his wife. "I could not do it," she said. "I know that makes me foolish. I had no prospects, no money, no way to support myself, but the thought of marrying him, of letting him touch me—" She shuddered. "I would rather have starved." "That does not make you foolish," Ethan said, and there was an edge to his voice now, something sharp and protective. "That makes you brave. A woman should not have to sell herself to survive. Not everyone would agree with you. Then not everyone is worth listening to." He shifted slightly in the saddle. "Your aunt will be glad to have you. She has been saying for years that the boarding house is getting to be too much for her to manage alone." They rode on as the sun sank lower, painting the desert in shades of orange and gold and deep purple. Nora found herself relaxing against Ethan's chest, lulled by the rhythmic gait of the horse and the warmth of his presence. She had been so afraid for so long, first of her father's creditors and then of Mr. Ashworth, and then of the unknown journey west. But here, now, with this stranger's arms around her and the vast desert spreading out in all directions, she felt something she had not felt in months: hope. The Double M Ranch appeared as the last light was fading from the sky, a cluster of low buildings arranged around a central courtyard. There was a main house, sturdy and well-built with a covered porch running along the front, and several outbuildings that Nora assumed were the bunkhouse, barn, and storage sheds. Lantern light glowed in the windows, warm and welcoming, and as they rode into the yard a man emerged from the barn, lean and weathered with a gray beard. "Boss," he called, then stopped short when he saw Nora. "You find yourself astray. This is Miss Nora Thompson, Jack." She ran into some trouble with a flash flood up in Copper Canyon, lost her horse and all her belongings. Ethan dismounted and then helped Nora down. "Miss Thompson, this is Jack Sullivan. He has been working the Double M since my father's time." "Pleased to meet you, miss," Jack said, tipping his hat. His eyes were kind beneath bushy gray eyebrows. "That canyon is a devil when the rains come. You are lucky the boss was up that way." "I know," Nora said fervently. "I owe him my life." "Well, you are safe now," Jack said. "I will take care of the horse, boss. You get the lady inside and cleaned up." Ethan led Nora to the main house, his hand light on her elbow, and opened the door to reveal a surprisingly cozy interior. The main room served as both kitchen and living area, with a large stone fireplace dominating one wall and a sturdy wooden table surrounded by chairs in the center. The furniture was simple but well made, and there were small touches that spoke of care: curtains on the windows, a colorful woven rug on the floor, a vase of dried wildflowers on the mantel. "It is not fancy," Ethan said, sounding almost apologetic, "but it is clean." "It is lovely," Nora said honestly. After weeks of traveling, of sleeping in train cars and questionable hotels, the ranch house felt like a haven. Ethan showed her to a small bedroom off the main room. "This was my mother's sewing room," he explained. "There is a bed and a washstand. I will heat some water for you so you can clean up, and I will see if I can find some of her old clothes. You are about the same size, I think." "Thank you," Nora said, feeling overwhelmed by his kindness. "I do not know how I will ever repay you." "No need to repay anything," Ethan said firmly. "Like I said, it is what anyone would do." But the way he looked at her, something soft and almost wondering in his gray eyes, made Nora think he might not do this for just anyone. He left her alone, and Nora sank onto the bed, her legs finally giving out. She was exhausted, her body aching from the fall and the hard ride, but beneath the exhaustion was a strange, fluttering excitement. Ethan Miller was unlike any man she had ever met. The gentleman of Philadelphia had been all polish and pretense, saying one thing and meaning another, but Ethan seemed to say exactly what he meant. his words as solid and dependable as the ground beneath her feet. A knock on the door interrupted her thoughts, and Ethan entered carrying a basin of steaming water and an armful of clothes. "I found some things," he said, setting them on the bed. "They might be a little old-fashioned, but they are clean." He paused, looking uncomfortable. "There is soap and a towel. I will be in the kitchen making dinner. Take your time." After he left, Nora examined the clothes. There was a simple cotton dress in a soft blue, a nightgown, and undergarments that were indeed old-fashioned but perfectly serviceable. She stripped off her ruined dress and washed away the mud and blood from her scrapes, hissing at the sting of soap on raw skin. The warm water felt like heaven, and by the time she had dressed in the borrowed clothes and attempted to tame her long, dark hair, she felt almost human again. When she emerged from the bedroom, she found Ethan at the stove, stirring something in a large pot. He had removed his hat and chaps, and in the lantern light she could see that his hair was almost black, thick and slightly curly where it brushed his collar. He turned when he heard her, and something flickered in his expression, gone too quickly for her to name. "Better?" he asked. "Much, thank you." Nora moved closer, drawn by the delicious smell coming from the pot. "What are you making?" "Just stew, nothing fancy." He ladled it into 2 bowls and carried them to the table, then pulled out a chair for her. "I am not much of a cook, but I have not starved yet." The stew was actually quite good, rich with beef and vegetables, and Nora ate ravenously, not realizing how hungry she had been until the food was in front of her. Ethan ate more slowly, his eyes on his bowl, and Nora found herself studying him in the lamplight. He had a good face, she decided, strong and honest, with laugh lines around his eyes that suggested he smiled more than he frowned. His hands were large and capable, scarred from years of ranch work, and she remembered how gentle they had been when he helped her down from the horse. "I have been thinking," Ethan said suddenly, breaking the comfortable silence, "about what you said earlier about being lonely." Nora's heart did a strange little skip. "Yes." He set down his spoon, his gray eyes meeting hers directly. "I know we just met. I know you probably think I am crazy for even bringing this up. But out here, we do not have the luxury of long courtships and formal introductions. Life is hard and it is short, and when you see something you want, you have to have the courage to reach for it." "Ethan," Nora said, not sure where he was going with this but feeling her pulse quicken. "Let me finish," he said, his voice rough with what sounded like nervousness. "When I pulled you out of that flood today, when I saw your face, I felt something I have not felt in a long time, maybe ever. Like I had been waiting for you without even knowing it." He ran a hand through his hair, looking uncharacteristically uncertain. "I saved you from that flood, but the truth is, I have been lonely for a long time. So I am wondering, if it is not too forward, if maybe you might consider letting me save you from loneliness too, and maybe you could do the same for me." Nora stared at him, her heart pounding. This man, this stranger who had risked his life to save hers, was offering her something she had never expected to find. A chance at happiness, at partnership, at love. It was crazy. It was too fast. It went against every rule of propriety she had ever been taught. "Are you asking me to stay?" She said quietly. "To stay here with you." "I am asking if you would consider it," Ethan said. "Not right away. You should go to your aunt, get settled, see what Agua Caliente is like, but I would like to court you properly if you will let me. I would like to take you on rides through the desert, show you the places I love. I would like to sit with you in the evenings and learn everything about you. And if, after all that, you think you might be able to care for me the way I already know I could care for you, then yes. I am asking you to stay, to make a life here with me." It was the most honest, heartfelt thing anyone had ever said to her. In Philadelphia, Men had danced around their intentions, hiding their true feelings behind elaborate courtship rituals and formal language. But Ethan laid his heart bare, his vulnerability somehow making him seem stronger, not weaker. "I do not know what to say," Nora admitted. "Say you will think about it," Ethan said. "That is all I am asking." Nora looked at him, at this good, kind man who had appeared in her life like a miracle, and felt something shift inside her, like a door opening onto a future she had never imagined. "I will think about it," she said. "But Ethan, I am glad you saved me, from the flood and from everything else." His smile transformed his face, lighting it up from within. "So am I," he said softly. They finished their meal in a charged silence, and then Ethan insisted on cleaning up while Nora sat by the fire, her body finally registering its exhaustion. She must have dozed off because the next thing she knew, Ethan was gently shaking her shoulder. "You should get some sleep," he said. "We have a long ride to Agua Caliente tomorrow." Nora let him guide her to the small bedroom, and as she lay down on the soft bed, she heard him moving around in the main room, banking the fire and blowing out the lamps. The house settled into quiet, and through the thin walls she could hear the faint sounds of him preparing for bed in what must be his own room. She should have felt awkward, sleeping under the roof of a man she barely knew, but instead she felt safe, protected. As if, for the first time since her father died, she could let her guard down and simply rest. Sleep claimed her quickly, and her dreams were full of gray eyes and strong hands and the promise of something new. Morning came with the sound of roosters crowing and the smell of coffee. Nora woke slowly, disoriented for a moment before she remembered where she was. She dressed quickly in the borrowed clothes and emerged to find Ethan already up, breakfast laid out on the table. "Morning," he said, looking up from his coffee with a smile. "How did you sleep?" "Better than I have in weeks," Nora admitted. "Is there anything I can do to help? Just sit and eat. We will head out after breakfast." The meal was simple but good. Eggs, bacon, fresh bread, and strong coffee. Jack joined them, along with two other ranch hands Ethan introduced as Tom and Miguel. The men were respectful and friendly, and Nora felt herself relaxing in their presence. This was so different from Philadelphia, where every interaction was governed by strict rules and expectations. Here, people said what they meant and meant what they said. After breakfast, Ethan saddled 2 horses and they set out for Agua Caliente. The morning air was cool and fresh, the desert coming alive with birdsong as the sun climbed higher. Ethan rode beside her, pointing out landmarks and telling her stories about the area. He showed her where the old Apache Trail ran through the mountains, and the spot where a stagecoach had been attacked by bandits 10 years ago, and the hidden spring where desert bighorn sheep came to drink. "You love this land," Nora observed. "I do," Ethan said simply. "It is in my blood, I think. I cannot imagine living anywhere else." "I am starting to understand why," Nora said, gazing out at the vast expanse of desert and sky. There was a raw beauty here, a sense of possibility that Philadelphia, with all its buildings and crowds, had never offered. They reached Agua Caliente just after noon. It was a small town, hardly more than a collection of buildings arranged along a single dusty street, but it had a certain charm. There was a general store, a saloon, a church, a blacksmith shop, and at the far end of town, a large 2-story building with a sign that read Thompson's boarding house. Ethan helped Nora down from her horse, his hands lingering on her waist for just a moment longer than necessary, and then they walked up the steps to the boarding house together. Before they could knock, the door flew open and a woman appeared, small and wiry with iron-gray hair and sharp blue eyes. "Nora," she exclaimed, pulling her into a tight embrace. "I got your telegram saying you would arrive today, but I expected you hours ago. I was starting to worry." "Aunt Margaret," Nora said, hugging her back. "I ran into some trouble on the way. If it were not for Mr. Miller, I do not know what would have happened." Margaret pulled back and looked at Ethan, her expression softening. "Ethan Miller, I might have known. You have a habit of showing up when people need you most." She reached out and squeezed his arm. "What happened?" Ethan explained about the flash flood, keeping the details brief, and Margaret's face went pale. "Dear God, you could have been killed." "But I was not," Nora said quickly. "Ethan saved me, and then he gave me a place to stay for the night and brought me here this morning. I lost everything in the flood, all my belongings." Margaret waved a hand dismissively. "Belongings can be replaced. You cannot. Come inside, both of you. You must be exhausted." The interior of the boarding house was cool and welcoming, with a large dining room off the entryway and stairs leading to the upper floor. Margaret led them to the kitchen and immediately began preparing tea, chattering the whole time about the town and the boarders currently in residence and how glad she was to finally have family with her again. Ethan excused himself after a few minutes, saying he needed to pick up supplies at the general store, and Nora felt an unexpected pang at his departure. She watched him go, his tall figure disappearing through the door, and when she turned back, she found her aunt watching her with knowing eyes. "He is a good man," Margaret said quietly. "I barely know him," Nora protested, feeling her cheeks heat. "That is not what I asked." Margaret poured the tea and sat down across from her. "Ethan Miller is one of the finest men I have ever known. His parents were dear friends of mine. When they died and left him that ranch, everyone expected him to fail. He was only 23, too young to run an operation that size on his own. But he worked harder than anyone I have ever seen, and he made it succeed through sheer determination. He is honest, kind, and loyal to a fault. He has also been alone for too long." "He said something similar last night," Nora admitted, "about being lonely." Margaret's eyebrows rose. "Did he now? That is interesting. Ethan is not the type to open up easily." "He asked if he could court me," Nora said, the words tumbling out in a rush. "I know it sounds crazy, we only just met. But Aunt Margaret, when he looks at me, I feel like he sees all of me, not just the parts I am supposed to show. And when I am with him, I feel safe in a way I have never felt before." "That does not sound crazy at all," Margaret said gently. "That sounds like the beginning of something real. Lord knows you deserve that after everything you have been through." She reached across the table and took Nora's hand. "But take your time. Get to know him. Get to know yourself out here, away from all the expectations and pressures of your old life. If it is meant to be, it will happen naturally." They spent the rest of the afternoon getting Nora settled in a comfortable room on the second floor, and Margaret gave her a tour of the boarding house, explaining how things ran and what her duties would be. There were currently 5 boarders: a school teacher named Miss Emily Carson, a retired miner named Henry Walsh, a widow named Mrs. Abigail Fletcher and her teenage son David, and a traveling salesman who was only staying for a few days. Dinner that evening was a lively affair, with everyone gathered around the long table in the dining room. The conversation flowed easily, and Nora found herself laughing more than she had in months. It felt good to be surrounded by people, to be part of something. After dinner, as she was helping Margaret clean up in the kitchen, there was a knock at the back door. Margaret smiled knowingly and nodded for Nora to answer it. Ethan stood on the step, his hat in his hands, looking uncertain. "I hope I am not intruding. I thought you might like to take a walk, see the town properly." Nora glanced back at Margaret, who made a shooing motion. "Go on. The dishes will keep." The evening air was cool and pleasant as they walked down the main street. Most of the businesses were closed for the night, but light spilled from the saloon, and the sound of a piano drifted out into the darkness. Ethan kept a respectful distance, his hands clasped behind his back, but Nora could feel the awareness between them like a physical thing. "I wanted to make sure you were settling in all right," he said. "I am. My aunt is wonderful. This whole town is wonderful, actually. It is so different from what I am used to. Different good or different bad?" "Good," Nora said firmly. "In Philadelphia, everything felt closed in and suffocating. Here, I can breathe." They walked in comfortable silence for a while, past the church with its whitewashed walls and simple cross, past the blacksmith shop where the forge glowed red in the darkness. At the edge of town, where the buildings gave way to open desert, Ethan stopped and turned to face her. "I meant what I said last night," he said, "about wanting to court you, but I do not want to pressure you. You have been through a lot and you need time to figure out what you want." "I do want that," Nora said, surprising herself with her certainty. "I want you to court me. I want to get to know you better. But Ethan, I need you to understand something. I am not the same naive girl I was when I left Philadelphia. What I went through with my father's death and Mr. Ashworth, it changed me, made me harder maybe, more cautious. I do not want you to be anything other than who you are," Ethan said. "And I do not expect you to trust me right away. Trust is something you earn, and I intend to earn yours." The sincerity in his voice made Nora's throat tighten with emotion. "You already saved my life. I think that is a pretty good start." He smiled, and in the moonlight his face was heartbreakingly handsome. "So I can come calling, take you on those rides I mentioned." "Yes," Nora said. "I would like that very much." The days that followed fell into a pleasant rhythm. Nora threw herself into helping Margaret run the boarding house, learning how to manage the kitchen, keep the rooms clean, and handle the various needs of the boarders. She discovered she had a talent for it, for making people feel welcome and cared for, and the work gave her a sense of purpose she had been missing. And every few days, Ethan would appear at the boarding house door, his hat in his hands and a hopeful expression on his face, ready to take her on another adventure. He showed her the desert at sunset, when the rocks glowed red and gold, and the sky turned impossible shades of purple and pink. He took her to a canyon where ancient petroglyphs covered the walls, symbols left by people who had lived there centuries before. He taught her to ride better, to read the signs of the weather, to spot the tracks of animals in the sand. But more than the places he showed her, it was the man himself who captivated her. Ethan was unlike anyone she had ever known. He was strong but gentle, confident but not arrogant. He listened when she talked, really listened, and he asked questions that showed he was genuinely interested in her thoughts and opinions. He made her laugh with his dry observations and occasional self-deprecating humor. And he was patient, never pushing for more than she was ready to give, content to simply be in her presence. 6 weeks after her arrival in Agua Caliente, Ethan took her to his favorite spot on the ranch, a high mesa that overlooked the valley below. They sat on the warm rocks and watched the cattle grazing in the distance, and Ethan pointed out the different sections of his property, explaining his plans for expanding the herd and building a new barn. "This is everything to me," he said, gesturing at the land spread out before them. "My father built it, and my mother made it a home, and now it is mine to carry forward. But lately I have been thinking it is too much for one person. Not the work, I mean, but the living of it. Coming home to an empty house every night, eating meals alone, having no one to share the good days or help shoulder the bad ones." He turned to look at her, his gray eyes serious. "I want to share it with you, Nora, not just the land but the life." Nora's heart was beating so hard she was sure he could hear it. "Ethan, I know it has only been a few weeks, he said quickly, but I have never been more sure of anything. I love you, Nora. I think I started falling in love with you the moment I pulled you out of that flood, and every day since then, I have fallen harder. I love your strength and your courage and the way you laugh when something surprises you. I love how kind you are to your aunt and the boarders, how you never complain even though I know you are still adjusting to how different everything is out here. I love the way you look at the desert, like you are seeing magic in something most people just see as empty space. Tears were streaming down Nora's face now, but they were happy tears, joyful tears. I love you too, she whispered. I did not think I could feel this way about someone. I thought maybe I was too damaged, too afraid, but you make me feel brave. You make me feel like I can be myself, all of myself, and that will be enough. It is more than enough, Ethan said roughly. He reached out and cupped her face in his hands, his thumbs gently wiping away her tears. It is everything. He kissed her then, soft and sweet and full of promise, and Nora felt like she was flying, soaring high above the desert floor with nothing to catch her but the strength of his arms and the certainty of his love. When they finally pulled apart, both of them were breathless, and Ethan rested his forehead against hers. "Marry me," he said. "As soon as you are ready. I will wait as long as you need, but say you will marry me." "Yes," Nora said, laughing and crying at the same time. "Yes, I will marry you." They rode back to town in the gathering twilight, their horses close together, their hands linked between them. Margaret took one look at their faces when they walked into the boarding house and let out a whoop of joy that brought all the boarders running. News spread through Agua Caliente with the speed of wildfire, and by the next morning, the entire town seemed to know that Ethan Miller had finally found himself a bride. They decided to wait until October for the wedding, giving Nora time to adjust to her new life and prepare for the change ahead. Margaret threw herself into planning with enthusiasm, and the other women of the town joined in, offering advice and assistance and endless opinions on everything from flowers to food. Ethan continued to court her properly, but there was a new ease between them now, a certainty that had not been there before. He would take her hand as they walked, or steal a kiss when they thought no one was watching, and every touch sent sparks racing through Nora's veins. She had never been touched with such tenderness, such desire tempered by respect, and she found herself counting the days until they would be married, and she could finally know him fully. One evening in late September, as they sat on the porch of the boarding house watching the stars come out, Ethan told her about his parents, his voice soft with memory. "My father was stern but fair," he said. "He worked from dawn to dusk and expected everyone else to do the same. But he also knew how to laugh, and he loved my mother with everything in him. You could see it in the way he looked at her, like she was the only woman in the world." "How did they meet?" Nora asked, her head resting on his shoulder. "At a dance in San Antonio. My father saw her across the room and told his friend he was going to marry her. They thought he was crazy, but he walked right up to her and asked her to dance, and by the end of the night she had agreed to be his wife." Ethan smiled. "I always thought that was just a story he told to be romantic. But now I understand. When you know, you know. Your mother must have been very special." "She was. She was small but fierce, and she could outshoot most men with a rifle. She had to, living out here. But she also had the softest heart. She would nurse injured animals back to health, and she always made sure to cook extra food in case someone showed up hungry. She taught me that strength and kindness are not opposites, that you can be both tough and tender." He turned to look at Nora. "You remind me of her sometimes. That same core of steel wrapped in gentleness." "I am honored," Nora said, meaning it. "I wish I could have known them." "They would have loved you," Ethan said with certainty. "My mother especially." She always said I needed to find a woman who would challenge me, who would not just agree with everything I said. You definitely do that, Nora laughed. Is that a complaint? Not even a little bit. He kissed the top of her head. It is one of the many things I love about you. The week before the wedding, a letter arrived from Philadelphia. Nora recognized Mr. Ashworth's heavy handwriting on the envelope and felt a chill run through her. She had not heard from him since leaving, had hoped he had forgotten about her, but apparently that had been wishful thinking. She opened the letter with trembling hands, and as she read, her face went pale. Margaret, seeing her distress, hurried over. "What is it? What is wrong?" "He is coming here," Nora said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Mr. Ashworth. He says he has business in Arizona territory and intends to stop in Agua Caliente to collect what is owed to him." "He cannot mean you," Margaret said, horrified. "You are not a possession to be collected." "He thinks I am. He says my father owed him $10,000 and that I agreed to settle the debt by marrying him." "Did you?" "No, I never agreed to anything. I ran away to avoid him." Nora crumpled the letter in her fist. "But he has documents, papers my father signed. He says if I do not honor the agreement, he will have me arrested for theft and fraud." "He cannot do that," Margaret said firmly. "That is not how the law works. Maybe not here, but in Philadelphia. He has friends in the police department, judges in his pocket. He could make my life a nightmare." Nora sank into a chair, feeling all the joy and hope of the past weeks drain away. "I should never have come here. I should never have let myself believe I could have a fresh start." "Stop that right now," Margaret said sharply. "You have every right to a fresh start. And that man has no power over you, not anymore. He is arriving next week, the day before the wedding. Then we will deal with him." Margaret's eyes were flashing with anger. "You are not alone anymore, Nora. You have me, and you have Ethan, and you have this whole town. We take care of our own out here." Nora wanted to believe her, but fear had its claws in deep. She had seen what Mr. Ashworth was capable of, the way he used money and influence to get what he wanted. How could a small town in Arizona territory stand against a wealthy Philadelphia businessman? She told Ethan that evening haltingly, expecting him to be angry or afraid. Instead, his face went very still and his eyes turned cold. "He is not taking you," he said, his voice quiet but absolute. "I do not care what papers he has or what threats he makes. You are not going back to him. But what if he can make legal trouble? What if he can have me arrested? Then we will fight it. I will hire the best lawyer in Arizona if I have to. I will go to Philadelphia myself and face him down. Whatever it takes, Nora, we will figure it out together." He took her hands in his grip strong and steady. "You saved me from loneliness, do you understand? Before you came, I was just going through the motions, working myself into the ground so I did not have to think about how empty my life was. But you changed everything. You brought light and laughter and love into my world, and I will be damned if I let anyone take that away. Take you away." His fierce protectiveness made Nora's eyes fill with tears. "I am so afraid. I know, but you do not have to be afraid alone anymore. I am right here, and I am not going anywhere." The days crawled by, each one bringing them closer to Mr. Ashworth's arrival. Ethan refused to let Nora face it alone, staying close and making sure she was never without support. The town, learning of the situation through the inevitable small-town gossip, rallied around them. The sheriff, a grizzled man named Tom Bradley who had known Ethan since he was a boy, promised to be present when Mr. Ashworth arrived. The local lawyer, a sharp-eyed woman named Sarah Mitchell who had moved west from Boston, offered her services free of charge. "I have seen too many women trapped by men with money and no morals," she said bluntly. "If he tries to use the law as a weapon against you, we will use it right back." Mr. Cornelius Ashworth arrived on the afternoon stage, 2 days before the wedding was scheduled to take place. He was exactly as Nora remembered, tall and heavyset, with silver hair and cold blue eyes that assessed everything in terms of value and profit. He wore an expensive suit that looked absurdly out of place in the dusty Arizona town, and he carried himself with the arrogance of a man who was accustomed to getting his way. Nora, flanked by Ethan and Sheriff Bradley, met him in front of the boarding house. She felt Ethan's solid presence beside her, his hand resting lightly on her back, and drew strength from it. "Nora," Mr. Ashworth said, his voice smooth and oily, "you have led me on quite a chase. I must say, I did not expect you to flee all the way to the frontier." "I did not flee," Nora said, lifting her chin. "I chose to leave. There is a difference. Semantics." He dismissed her words with a wave of his hand. "The point is, you have obligations back in Philadelphia. Your father's debts do not disappear simply because you run away from them." "My father's debts died with him," Nora said. "I am not legally responsible for them." "Ah, but you made an agreement." Mr. Ashworth reached into his jacket and withdrew a folded document. "Your father signed a promissory note, witnessed by 2 upstanding citizens, agreeing that if he could not repay the loan, you would marry me in settlement. That makes it a legal contract." Sheriff Bradley took the document and examined it, his weathered face unreadable. After a long moment, he handed it back. "This says the girl agreed to the terms. Did you agree, Miss Thompson?" "No," Nora said firmly. "I never signed anything. I never agreed to anything. My father made that agreement without my knowledge or consent." "She was 18 when this was signed," Mr. Ashworth said. "Old enough to be bound by her father's legal agreements." "Not in matters of marriage," Sarah Mitchell said, appearing from the crowd that had gathered. She was a small woman with steel gray hair and the sharp gaze of a hawk. "A woman cannot be forced to marry against her will, even to settle a debt. That is settled law, Mr. Ashworth, and if you practiced in any state with actual legal standards rather than corrupt local courts, you would know that." Mr. Ashworth's face flushed red. "Who are you?" "Sarah Mitchell, attorney at law, and I have reviewed the relevant statutes. You have no legal claim on Miss Thompson. Your recourse, if any, would be against your debtor's estate, not his daughter." "The estate has no assets," Mr. Ashworth snarled. "I am owed $10,000. "Then I am afraid you made a poor investment," Sarah said coolly. "But that is the risk of lending money, is it not? Sometimes you lose." "I will not lose." Mr. Ashworth turned his attention back to Nora, and there was something ugly in his expression now. "You think you can make a new life out here? With this cowboy?" He looked at Ethan dismissively. "What can he offer you? A life of back-breaking work and poverty? Come back to Philadelphia with me. I will give you everything you could want. A fine home, beautiful clothes, a place in society. And in return, I would have to share your bed and bear your children and pretend to be grateful for the prison you built for me," Nora said, her voice steady despite the nausea churning in her stomach. "No, thank you, Mr. Ashworth. I would rather have an honest life with a good man than all the wealth in the world with you." Ethan's hand tightened on her back, a silent gesture of pride and support. Mr. Ashworth's eyes narrowed. "You will regret this. I have friends, Miss Thompson, powerful friends. I can make things very difficult for you." "You have no power here," Sheriff Bradley said, his voice hard. "This is my town and these are my people. If you have legal business to conduct, Mrs. Mitchell is the person to speak with. Otherwise, I suggest you take the next stage back to wherever you came from. You backwater fools do not know who you are dealing with," Mr. Ashworth hissed. "I will have lawyers all over this territory. I will tie you up in courts for years. I will make you wish you had never heard of Nora Thompson." That is enough." Ethan's voice was quiet, but there was steel underneath it. He stepped forward, placing himself between Nora and Mr. Ashworth. "You need to leave, now. Or what? You will shoot me," Mr. Ashworth sneered. "This is not the lawless frontier of dime novels, boy. There are consequences for violence." "I am not going to shoot you," Ethan said. "I am not going to lay a hand on you, much as I might want to. But I am going to make sure you understand something very clearly. Nora is under my protection. She is going to be my wife. And if you ever come near her again, if you ever try to hurt her or threaten her or make her life difficult, you will find out exactly how much power a man can have when he is protecting the woman he loves." He leaned in closer. "I do not need to break the law, Mr. Ashworth. I just need to be patient. Accidents happen out in the desert. People get lost. Flash floods come out of nowhere. And a man in fancy city clothes who does not know the land, well, that is a man who might not make it back to civilization." It was not an outright threat, but the implication was clear. Mr. Ashworth's face went pale, and for the first time since his arrival he looked uncertain. "You are making a mistake," he said, but the bluster had gone out of his voice. "No," Nora said. "The only mistake I made was not running away from you sooner." Mr. Ashworth stared at her for a long moment, as if trying to understand how the timid girl he thought he had cornered in Philadelphia had become this confident woman who could look him in the eye and reject him utterly. Then, without another word, he turned and stalked toward the hotel, his expensive shoes kicking up dust. The crowd that had gathered let out a collective breath, and then someone started clapping. The applause spread, and suddenly Nora was surrounded by townspeople offering their congratulations and support. Margaret hugged her tightly, tears streaming down her face, and Sarah Mitchell gave her a brisk nod of approval. But it was Ethan Nora turned to, Ethan whose arms she fell into, Ethan whose solid strength held her up as the adrenaline drained away and left her shaking. "You did it," he murmured into her hair. "You stood up to him. I am so proud of you." "I could not have done it without you," Nora said. "Without all of you?" "Yes, you could have," Ethan said, pulling back to look at her. "You are stronger than you know, Nora Thompson. You always have been." Mr. Ashworth left on the morning stage, and Nora watched from the boarding house window as he climbed aboard, his face set in bitter lines. She felt no triumph, no satisfaction, only an overwhelming sense of relief. That chapter of her life was finally, truly closed. The wedding took place 2 days later in the small whitewashed church at the edge of town. Margaret had outdone herself with the preparations, filling the church with desert wildflowers and arranging for a celebration afterwards at the boarding house. Nora wore a simple white dress that Margaret had helped her sew, with lace at the collar and cuffs, and she carried a bouquet of golden poppies. As she walked down the aisle on her aunt's arm, her eyes found Ethan waiting at the altar, and the rest of the world seemed to fall away. He wore his best clothes, his dark hair freshly cut, and the look on his face as he watched her approach was one of such open love and wonder that Nora felt tears prick at her eyes. The ceremony was simple and heartfelt. The preacher spoke about the sanctity of marriage and the importance of partnership, about how two people who commit themselves to each other can weather any storm. And when it came time for the vows, Ethan took Nora's hands in his and spoke from the heart. "Nora, I promise to love you, to protect you, to stand beside you through whatever life brings. I promise to listen when you speak and to value your thoughts and opinions. I promise to work hard to build us a good life, but never to let that work come before you. I promise to make you laugh when you are sad and to hold you when you are afraid. And I promise that every single day I will remember how lucky I am that a flash flood brought you into my life." Nora was crying in earnest now, but she smiled through her tears as she made her own vows. Ethan, I promise to love you with all my heart. I promise to be your partner in all things, to share the burdens and the joys equally. I promise to build a home with you, not just a house, but a place of warmth and laughter and love. I promise to be brave when life is hard and to celebrate with you when life is good. And I promise that no matter what challenges we face, I will never forget that you are the man who saved me in every way a person can be saved. When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, Ethan kissed her with such tenderness that the whole church erupted in applause and cheers. And as they walked back down the aisle together, hand in hand, Nora felt like she was floating, like she had finally found the place where she belonged. The celebration at the boarding house lasted well into the evening. There was food and music and dancing, and Nora found herself passed from one partner to another, as it seemed everyone in town wanted to congratulate her. But her eyes kept finding Ethan across the room, and every time their gazes met, she felt a thrill of anticipation for the night to come. Finally, as the stars came out and the party began to wind down, Ethan claimed her hand and led her outside to where his horse waited, saddled and ready. "I thought we could ride out to the ranch," he said, his voice low and intimate. "Start our married life in our own home." "I would like that," Nora said. They rode through the moonlit desert, the horse moving at an easy pace, and Nora leaned back against Ethan's chest, feeling his heart beating steady and strong against her back. When they arrived at the Double M, the ranch was quiet, the bunkhouse dark. Jack had made sure the main house was prepared for them, with lamps lit and the bedroom made up with fresh linens. Ethan helped Nora down from the horse and then, to her surprise, swept her into his arms and carried her over the threshold. She laughed, delighted, and he grinned down at her. "Some traditions are worth keeping," he said, setting her gently on her feet inside. They stood in the lamp-lit main room, suddenly uncertain now that they were alone. Nora's heart was racing, a combination of nervousness and desire coursing through her. Ethan seemed to sense her hesitation because he took her hand and led her to sit on the sofa by the fireplace. "We do not have to rush anything," he said. "I know this is all new for you. We can take our time." "I want this," Nora said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I want you." "I am just nervous." "So am I," Ethan admitted, and the vulnerability in his voice made her love him even more. "I have never been with anyone I cared about the way I care about you. I do not want to do anything that makes you uncomfortable." Nora reached up and touched his face, feeling the roughness of his jaw beneath her palm. "Then just love me," she said. "The way you have been loving me since the moment we met, with patience and kindness and honesty." He kissed her then, soft and slow, and Nora felt herself melting into him. His hands were gentle as they found the buttons of her dress, as he slowly, reverently, helped her out of her clothes. And when she reached for him, helping him shed his own garments, there was no awkwardness, only a sense of rightness, of two people finally becoming one. That night, in the big bed that had once belonged to Ethan's parents, they discovered each other with wonder and joy. Ethan was as patient and tender as he had promised, guiding Nora through her nervousness until pleasure overtook uncertainty. And afterwards, as they lay tangled together in the darkness, Nora thought that she had never felt so complete, so utterly and perfectly where she was meant to be. The months that followed were perhaps the happiest of Nora's life. She threw herself into making the ranch house a home, sewing curtains and rugs, planting a garden, learning to cook the meals Ethan loved. She discovered she had a talent for ranching as well, helping with the horses and even learning to rope and brand cattle. The work was hard, harder than anything she had done in Philadelphia, but it was honest work and it was theirs. Ethan was everything a husband should be and more. He consulted her on decisions about the ranch, valuing her input even when she protested that she knew nothing about cattle. He surprised her with small gifts: a book of poetry from the general store, a length of pretty fabric for a new dress, wildflowers picked on his way home from checking the herds. And every night, without fail, he told her he loved her, as if the words were as necessary as breathing. They had their challenges, of course. There was a drought that first winter that made them worry about water for the cattle. One of the ranch hands got into a fight in town and had to be let go. Nora struggled with homesickness sometimes, missing her aunt and the bustle of the boarding house. But through it all, they faced things together, their partnership growing stronger with each obstacle they overcame. Ethan taught Nora to read the land, to see the subtle signs that meant rain was coming or that the cattle were getting restless. Nora taught Ethan to talk about his feelings instead of bottling them up, to let her share his burdens instead of trying to shoulder everything alone. By the time spring arrived, painting the desert in shades of green and gold as wildflowers bloomed in profusion, Nora had a secret. She waited until she was sure, until there was no doubt in her mind, before she told Ethan. They were sitting on the porch one evening, watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant colors, when she took his hand and placed it on her still flat stomach. "We are going to have a baby," she said softly. Ethan went very still, his gray eyes wide with wonder. "Are you sure?" "I am sure. I saw the doctor in town this morning. He says the baby should come in October." For a moment, Ethan did not speak. Then he pulled her into his arms, holding her so tightly she could barely breathe, and she felt him shaking with emotion. "A baby," he whispered. "Our baby. Nora, I do not have words for how happy I am." "You are happy." Nora pulled back to look at his face, needing to see the truth in his eyes. "I know we have not talked about children yet, and the ranch is still growing and money is tight." "I am so happy I could fly," Ethan said, his voice choked with tears. "You have given me everything I did not know I needed, Nora. A home, a partner, and now a child. How did I get so lucky?" "We both got lucky," Nora said, her own tears flowing freely now. "That flash flood brought us together." "Best flood I ever saw," Ethan said, and then he was kissing her, his hands cradling her face as if she were made of precious glass. The pregnancy progressed without complications, and as Nora's belly grew round, Ethan became even more protective and attentive. He would not let her lift anything heavy, insisted she rest in the afternoons, and worried constantly about whether she was eating enough. Nora found his hovering both exasperating and endearing, and she loved him for it. Margaret came out to the ranch frequently to check on her, bringing supplies and advice and stories about her own long-ago pregnancies. The women of Agua Caliente organized a gathering to make baby clothes and blankets, and Nora found herself part of a community in a way she had never experienced in Philadelphia. On a cool October evening, as the sun was setting and the air smelled of wood smoke and autumn, Nora went into labor. Ethan, normally so calm and capable, nearly panicked, running around the house gathering towels and hot water while Margaret, who had come to stay for the birth, calmly took charge. The labor was long and hard, lasting through the night and into the next day. Ethan stayed by Nora's side the entire time, holding her hand, wiping her forehead with a cool cloth, murmuring words of encouragement when the pain seemed unbearable. And when the baby finally arrived, a healthy, squalling boy with a shock of dark hair and his father's gray eyes, Ethan wept openly. "A son," he said, his voice filled with awe as he held the tiny bundle for the first time. "We have a son, Nora." "What should we name him?" Nora asked, exhausted but radiant as she watched her husband cradle their child. Ethan thought for a long moment. "James, after my father. James Thompson Miller, if that is all right with you." "It is perfect," Nora said. "He would be so proud." Little James proved to be a healthy, happy baby with a sunny disposition and his mother's smile. Ethan was besotted with him, spending hours just watching him sleep or carrying him around the ranch to show him the cattle and horses. Nora would find them in the barn sometimes, Ethan talking to the baby in a low, serious voice about ranching and responsibility and how to be a good man, and her heart would swell with love for both of them. The years passed in a blur of hard work and happiness. The ranch prospered, the herd growing until the Double M was one of the most successful operations in the territory. They built a bigger house, with a nursery and a proper parlor, and planted trees around the property to provide shade. James grew into a sturdy toddler and then a curious little boy, shadowing his father everywhere and asking endless questions. When James was 3, Nora gave birth to a daughter they named Sarah Margaret, after the lawyer who had helped them and the aunt who had given Nora a second chance. Sarah had her mother's dark hair and green eyes, and a stubborn streak that made Ethan laugh and shake his head. "She is just like you," he told Nora one evening as they watched Sarah refuse to go to bed, her little arms crossed and her chin set at a mutinous angle. "She is your daughter too," Nora pointed out. "That stubbornness is definitely a Miller trait." They had 2 more children over the years, another son, Thomas, and finally a daughter they named Emily. The house was always full of noise and laughter and the organized chaos of a large family. Ethan expanded the ranch, buying adjacent properties, and took on a partner to help manage the growing operation. Nora ran the household with efficient grace, raised their children with love and discipline, and still found time to help Margaret with the boarding house when extra hands were needed. Through it all, their love never wavered. If anything, it deepened, maturing from the passionate romance of their early days into something richer and more profound. They weathered droughts and floods, sick cattle and injured horses, sick children and sleepless nights. They celebrated successes and supported each other through failures. And every evening, no matter how tired they were or how busy the day had been, they found time to sit together on the porch and watch the sunset, just as they had on their wedding night. On their 20th wedding anniversary, Ethan took Nora back to the spot where he had proposed, the high mesa overlooking the valley. Their children were grown now, or nearly so. James was 20, working the ranch alongside his father and courting a girl from town. Sarah was 17, fierce and independent, already talking about going to the new normal school in Tucson to become a teacher. Thomas was 15 and Emily 13, both still at home but growing up faster than Nora liked to admit. "You remember what I said to you here?" Ethan asked as they stood looking out over the land they had built their life on. "Every word," Nora said, leaning into his side. "You told me you wanted to share this with me, the land and the life." "I did not know then how much you would give me in return," Ethan said. "I thought I was saving you from loneliness, but the truth is you saved me. You gave me a reason to wake up every morning excited about what the day would bring. You gave me children and laughter and love. You gave me everything." Nora turned to face him, reaching up to touch his face. His hair was graying now at the temples, and there were lines around his eyes from years of squinting into the sun. But to her, he was just as handsome as the day he pulled her from the flood. "I was drowning in more ways than one when you found me," she said. "Drowning in fear and obligation and the weight of other people's expectations. You gave me the freedom to figure out who I really was, who I wanted to be. And you loved that person, flaws and all. That is the greatest gift anyone has ever given me." "I fell in love with you the moment I saw you," Ethan said. "And I fall in love with you again every single day." He kissed her then, slow and sweet, And Nora thought about the girl she had been 20 years ago, terrified and alone in a dry wash with a wall of water bearing down on her. That girl could never have imagined the life she would build, the family she would create, the love she would find. "Thank you," she whispered against his lips, "for asking if you could save me from loneliness too." "Thank you," he replied, "for saying yes." They stood together on that mesa as the sun set, painting the desert in shades of gold and crimson. Two people who had found each other against all odds and built something beautiful from nothing but determination and love. Below them, the double M spread out in all directions, home to their children and their dreams and their legacy. And as the first stars appeared in the darkening sky, they turned together and rode back down to the life they had made, hand in hand, hearts entwined, ready for whatever the future would bring. Years continued to pass, each one bringing its own joys and challenges. James married his sweetheart, a practical young woman named Lucy who fit into the family as if she had always been there, and they built a house on the eastern section of the ranch. Sarah did go to normal school, graduated at the top of her class, and returned to Agua Caliente to teach at the local schoolhouse. Thomas showed a talent for working with horses and began breeding and training them, creating a profitable side business for the ranch. And Emily, the baby of the family, turned out to have her grandmother's head for business, keeping the ranch's books with meticulous care. Nora and Ethan became grandparents, first to James and Lucy's son, then to a string of grandchildren from all their children. The big ranch house was often filled with the sound of little feet and childish laughter, and Nora would sometimes catch Ethan's eye across a crowded dinner table and share a smile of pure contentment. Margaret lived to see her great nieces and nephews, passing away peacefully in her sleep at the age of 82. The whole town turned out for her funeral, testament to the impact she had made on so many lives. Nora inherited the boarding house and passed it on to Sarah, who ran it alongside her teaching duties with characteristic efficiency. As they grew older, Ethan and Nora's hair turned silver and their steps slowed, but their love remained as strong as ever. They would sit on the porch in the evenings, watching their grandchildren play in the yard and talk about the life they had built together. "Do you ever think about that day?" Nora asked one evening, on the 40th anniversary of the flash flood that had brought them together. "When you pulled me out of the water." "All the time," Ethan said. "I think about how close I came to not being there. If I had checked the north pastures instead of the canyon, if I had left an hour earlier or later. Sometimes fate hangs on such small things." "I think we were meant to find each other," Nora said. "One way or another we would have met." "Maybe," Ethan said, "but I am glad it happened the way it did. I am glad I got to be the one to save you." "And I am glad you asked if you could save me from loneliness too," Nora said, taking his hand in hers, their fingers intertwining as naturally as breathing. "You gave me a life beyond anything I could have imagined." "We gave each other a life," Ethan corrected. "That is what love does. It multiplies everything, makes it bigger and brighter than it could be alone." They sat in comfortable silence as the sun set, painting the sky in the brilliant colors they had watched together for 4 decades. The desert stretched out before them, eternal and unchanging, bearing witness to their enduring love. Ethan lived to see his 75th birthday, surrounded by his children, grandchildren, and even a few great-grandchildren. He passed away on a warm spring morning, peacefully, with Nora holding his hand and his family gathered around him. His last words were, "I love you always," and Nora held those words close to her heart like a precious treasure. Grief was hard, harder than anything Nora had faced since those dark days in Philadelphia so long ago. But she was not alone. Her children and grandchildren surrounded her with love and support, and she found comfort in the land Ethan had loved so much, in the legacy they had built together. She lived another 10 years, long enough to see all her children settled and happy, long enough to hold great-great-grandchildren in her arms and tell them stories about their great-grandfather and the flash flood that had changed everything. She remained sharp and engaged until the end, still offering advice on ranch management and settling family disputes with the wisdom of long experience. On what would have been her 50th wedding anniversary, Nora asked her grandson to take her up to the mesa where Ethan had proposed. She stood there, looking out over the valley, and felt his presence beside her as clearly as if he were really there. "I kept my promises," she said aloud to the empty air. "I loved you with all my heart. I built a home with you. I never forgot that you saved me in every way a person can be saved." She smiled, tears streaming down her weathered face. "And now I am ready to come find you again. Wait for me, my love. I will not be long." Nora Thompson Miller passed away peacefully in her sleep 3 days later at the age of 89. The funeral was the largest Agua Caliente had ever seen, with people traveling from all over Arizona territory to pay their respects to the woman who had touched so many lives with her kindness and strength. They buried her next to Ethan on a hill overlooking the Double M, under a sky so blue and vast it seemed to go on forever. And on the shared headstone, beneath their names and dates, was a simple inscription chosen by their children. He saved her from a flood. She saved him from loneliness. Together they built a legacy of love. The Double M Ranch remained in the family for generations, passed down from parents to children, each one adding their own story to the rich tapestry of the land. And sometimes, on quiet evenings when the sun was setting and the desert was painted in gold, ranch hands swore they could see 2 figures on the mesa, standing close together, watching over the land they had loved. The story of Ethan and Nora became part of the mythology of Agua Caliente, told and retold until it took on the quality of legend. Young people in love would ride out to the mesa and make their promises to each other in the same spot where Ethan had proposed. The boarding house, still run by descendants of the family, kept a photograph of Ethan and Nora in the front hall, a reminder of where it had all begun. But for those who had known them, who had seen the way they looked at each other even after decades of marriage, who had witnessed the quiet daily acts of love and devotion that made up their life together, the story was not a legend. It was simply the truth, that 2 people who should never have met, brought together by chance and a flash flood in the Arizona desert, had found in each other something rare and precious and eternal. They had built a life on harsh land, had raised children and cattle and dreams. They had weathered every storm together, their love the shelter they both needed. And in the end, they had left behind not just a legacy of land and family, but a legacy of hope. That love, real and true and lasting, was possible if you were brave enough to reach for it. The desert remembered them, as it remembered all the lives lived upon it. The wind whispered their story through the canyons. The stars that had watched over their courtship continued to shine. And somewhere, in the great mystery beyond this life, 2 souls walked hand in hand through an endless desert sunset, finally and forever free from all loneliness, united by the love that had defined them both. Their story, like all the best love stories, had found its happy ending. Not because everything was perfect, but because they had chosen each other every single day, through every challenge and joy, until death finally parted them. And even then, those who believed in such things knew that it was only a temporary parting, that love like theirs transcended the boundaries between this world and the next. The flash flood that had nearly taken Nora's life had instead given her everything: home, family, purpose, and a love that would echo through generations. And Ethan, the lonely cowboy who had asked if he could save her from loneliness, had been saved in return, transformed from a man simply existing into a man truly living. In the end, that was the real miracle of their story. Not that he had saved her from drowning, though that was remarkable enough, but that they had saved each other from the slow drowning of lonely hearts, and in doing so had discovered that the greatest adventure of all was building a life together, one day at a time, one choice at a time, one act of love at a time. And so their story ended where all the best stories end, with two people who loved each other deeply, lived fully, and left the world a better place than they found it, their legacy living on in the children and grandchildren who carried their names and their values forward into an uncertain future, guided by the certainty of their example. The desert sun continued to rise and set over the Double M Ranch. The cattle still grazed in the valleys. The house still stood strong against the wind. And in the hearts of everyone who had been touched by Ethan and Nora's love, their story lived on, a reminder that sometimes the worst moments of our lives can lead to the best, that courage and kindness matter more than wealth or status, and that love, true love, is worth every risk and every sacrifice. They had been saved from loneliness by finding each other, and in doing so had saved countless others from the same fate, teaching by example that love was not just possible but necessary, not just a luxury but a foundation upon which everything else was built. Their love had been tested by time and trial, and it had emerged stronger, deeper, more beautiful with each passing year. And if that was not a happy ending, then perhaps no such thing existed in this world. But for Ethan and Nora Miller, it was enough, more than enough. It was everything.